Okay, so what I want to talk about today is something that's very important to realize, I believe. It has certainly changed my perspective, and that's knowing exactly when you're doing intellectual work and just feeling it, knowing exactly what it is, and differentiating it from all other kinds of work. So, when I say intellectual work, probably what many people would think, maybe not listeners of this channel, but the general population, probably they would think office work, uh, or some kinds of general jobs. Um, I don't know if you can call studying a job, but general activities, like parts of your life. Research, perhaps, the career of a scientist, that kind of thing. Now, granted, I don't have a super clear definition of what intellectual work actually is, but when you take, for example, office work, the most obvious example is answering emails. Do you think answering emails is intellectual work? You probably wouldn't say so. Now, it's not exactly physical that much, but you could hardly call it intellectual also. So, the very basic definition of intellectual work is just the work that you are doing with your mind. So, in office work, for example, or studying even, uh, there is a lot of work that just needs to get done, but is not particularly challenging for your brain. Also, not physically, but for your brain too. Uh, and it's exhausting, but it's hard to tell why, really. It's not like you're really straining intellectually. So, story time, okay? One time I was studying for an exam, the next day, of course, as you would, and I decided to. Well, I didn't really study that much the entire semester. Uh, that was a very particular semester. That was when the C word happened. So things were a little bit out of whack. Uh, and yes, so I decided to cram everything for the night before. And I only got 2 hours of sleep before the exam. Uh, I was just going through the slides sent by the professor, just the whole day and whole night. I was jacked up on caffeine. I was sleep deprived and listening to Metallica at full volume. So my cognitive ability uh, probably suffered quite a lot. It's not multiple days sleep deprived, but it's, my cognitive ability wasn't at 100% or even probably 80%. So I was going through the slides, uh, and just trying to break them down. What is this slide all about? What are the elements on this slide? And I had a realization that that's kind of precisely what you need to do. That's all you need to do. So you just need to break things down, and that's that's a process. It's not that particularly intellectually challenging. Like, you would think it's 100% intellectual work, but actually it kind of just takes time to break it down, see what this element is, uh, what is this relation between those two. Maybe go back to the previous slide and just check what actually this one variable is. So, for example, charts. There are many very complicated charts when you're studying engineering, for example, uh, or science. Let's say you have a chart with one y-axis and then another y-axis that goes the other way and it's logarithmic, and then you have two lines representing two databases, and what is on the x-axis and what does this data represent, one line and then the other, what physical law maybe it represents, uh, what is really the purpose of this chart, what it shows, like all together. Or for example, equations. Like you have long equations with lots of variables, and you need to know what those variables are. And you need to, maths. You have, or math. But it, I guess in the UK they do multiple maths. In the US they only do one. You need to uh, in in math or maths, you need to know what the spaces that you are using. There are multiple spaces with different rules uh, of computing, let's say, uh, different operations that can be done on those variables. So you need to orient yourself what the rules are in this particular space, what the variables are, uh, and what is this equation supposed to represent, where it's coming from. Like even if you need to derive this equation, uh, it's usually just pretty simple, and that's actually the thing. Uh, those things are pretty simple when you think about it. They are complex in the execution. Each equation can have very many variables and very many things that you need to consider and keep in your mind. However, it's a finite number, and the relationships between those variables, they are represented in the equation already, so they're not particularly, how do I say, uh, non-explicit, implicit. Uh, they're not that hard to understand. Uh, so, especially when you are in this low cognitive function mode, you kind of see things as just big blobs. Like you have this one big blob of one law, and then another of some other physical law, or maybe mathematical law, or some uh, some formula, whatever, and then you put them together, and you get this third blob, and you kind of see things from a more distant perspective instead of getting into the details of what each blob has particularly, and that actually is all that you need to know, really. So professors are not going to expect you to be like some super genius. They just want you to know the basic stuff, and there can be a lot of basic stuff, and it's a lot of work. Let's be honest, it is, and it's just very difficult. However, it's doable. It's not like some Herculean feat that only the special ones uh, can succeed in. It's doable for everyone, pretty much, with minor exceptions. but in their own time, pretty much everyone can succeed in understanding a finite amount of pretty simple concepts. So this story ends with me doing pretty well on the exam. Of course, this is n=1. I cannot tell what would happen if I studied the more conservative way, the more reasonable way. But I ended up doing, I think, pretty well. Just not even in its own right compared to other exams that I had tried to study for more reasonably and in a more smart way. I think I did surprisingly well, and even better than with those reasonable practices in a very short amount of time, one day. So this really shows what I said many videos ago, that while studying or working smart is important, and you need to figure out the best ways to do things. Really, working very, very hard gets you to the goal. It's like, by the definition of work, so the physical definition of work is applying a force and moving an object at a certain distance. Ultimately, you have to move that object. Now, it's important to know how to apply the force, but ultimately, when the force is applied in the right direction, even more or less the right direction, you just have to push really, really hard. And now, this whole process of breaking things down, it really requires time. So, like I said, but it's important to realize, even if I was at 100% cognitive ability, you could make the case that I would have gone through the process faster. I would have noticed those relationships faster, and make the whole process much less painless. But ultimately, you do have to, for example, even go back to the previous slide to see what this one variable is. You do have to go through that process, and that process takes time. So it's important also to realize that this whole video was supposed to be about knowing when you are doing intellectual work, and I didn't actually reference that, but now I will go back to it. So this process of studying shows you that even this process of studying in a sleep deprived state shows you that even studying is in large part not intellectual work. It's not that cognitively demanding. It's just a process that you have to go through. And this is important to realize, because you need to work hard, and you don't have to be at 100% cognitive ability. So, of course, there are certain tasks, like figuring out a formula of doing something better, that are very cognitively demanding, and you kind of need to be at 100%. But something that might seem like intellectual work, might not be. And often we take a break because at some point you do have to take a break. Uh, and it's we often make the excuse that we're taking a break because it improves our cognitive ability. I mean, we've all heard about the research that says that taking a break improves actually efficiency. That's more complicated than just this simple statement. And so it's important to realize that if you want to take a break, sure, but that is mainly because you just want to take a break. It's not really to actually improve your performance. And it's we don't usually have one priority in life that is just above all else and nothing else matters. But when we need to apply ourselves to 100% and we need to get the best results in the shortest amount of time, it's important to realize that maybe you're just making excuses. And, to make it not as negative, I mean, just consider breaks as making your life less miserable, let's say. It's just, you don't want to be working all the time, probably, and that's fine. But it's not necessarily better for performance. That's all, and thank you.